Your book, Lost Boys, A Personal Journey Through the Manosphere, has been described as an astonishing undercover investigation into the paranoid and misogynistic subcultures of the Manosphere, end quote. So first question, what, if anything, surprised you about the Manosphere while you were undercover inside of it?
I'd say the thing that probably surprised me most was how much easier it's got to get drawn into the manosphere nowadays with social media. The way in which you can be kind of steadily radicalized through content that is quite benign at first. I mean, even calling it content makes it sound more benign than it is because it's often
Yeah.
advertising. So it's often social media entrepreneurs making their audience feel insecure and then presenting themselves as like saviors and guides who will fix these men. The way the algorithm works, you have men who start watching like Jordan Peterson
Mhm.
on Instagram or YouTube, and then they're very quickly being recommended, say, Andrew Tate. Um, like within an hour or two, that can happen. I didn't really realize the extent to which that was going on before I set up for the Manosphere. Also, I suppose I didn't realize how bad it was. We think in some ways, in the West or in Britain anyway, and in America somewhat, that we've kind of we've solved some of these issues around misogyny, or at least made like great progress on them. But the thing that I suppose shocked me was the level at which a lot of that stuff is still there, just beneath the surface.
What kind of personality exactly gets pulled into the manosphere? Do men who follow those who spout seriously misogynistic ideas even understand that somewhere deep inside they might hate women? James Bloodworth has thoughts on all of this and more, having gone deep undercover inside this type of toxic masculinity and deep into parts of the manosphere as research for his book Lost Boys. Bloodworth took a journey not a lot of people have, and his skepticism gave him a different take on how we got here, how bad it's gotten, how much of it was latent all along, and where we're headed.
People just sometimes put on this facade of political correctness. But then when someone like Andrew Tate comes along and says all of these things like women should be in the kitchen and, um, you should not let your female partner have any male friends and you should basically decide what they should wear when they go out. I met these men who basically were nodding along with that, and you wouldn't really know it if you just met them for kind of 5 minutes in the street or something. But it was kind of there was just these normal guys who had this real kind of anger and resentment towards women, and it was already there. It was already latent in many ways, but then because as the manosphere grew bigger, they kind of brought it out, and then these people felt more confident to kind of express those views openly in a way. Like it never really went away. Some of the misogyny, not
Well,
not that all men are misogynists or anything like that. And obviously, I think
no, of course not.
I grew up, in the 90s and 2000s when some of the things I would probably believe, would be misogynist, considered sexist at least today. But I think kind of the way the manosphere didn't necessarily create some and make some of these people misogynistic. It was already there in some instances, and they just kind of drew it out. And I felt like that was probably one of the most disconcerting things about it. Just how easy it was for some men to just flip and then start dehumanizing women, where they don't really see them as human beings in the same way that they see their male bros as kind of human beings. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of disturbing because it's not something that happens in my everyday life.
Yeah, I think couple of threads there that you mentioned. One I would point to is I was not surprised that men were as easy to push over the tipping point towards this level of misogyny. And I say push over the tipping point because of the point you just made, which is that there was a lot of frustration that's been latent in the male female dynamic for centuries because it's frustrating being a man and not having a girlfriend. Of course, it's frustrating, right? But I think that latent frustration naturally growing into anger and that anger naturally growing into resentment is nothing new. I think what you're making a good point about is that now that resentment has been radicalized for financial gain. It feels to me like many of the men who are so-called alphas or whatever in the manosphere are in fact not necessarily even believing what they're saying. It is about making money. And you make money when you have a captive audience. And you have a captive audience when you make them believe you have something or you know something that they don't. And one of the best ways to do that is to make them feel insecure. It's the
Yeah,
diet industry, the push up industry. The difference is women are not using push up bras to strangle and kill people. But it's a similar dynamic. And so I don't know why we don't talk about the manosphere in terms of radicalization of natural male frustration. Because if you use the word radicalization, then you understand there is a playbook in religious radicalization. And so when you were talking about this in one of your other interviews, you described the manosphere as a sales funnel. And this was a great quote. You said, the manosphere is a place where young men find themselves pursuing someone else's idea of the good life. Please
yeah,
elaborate.
basically.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, and it's right what you say about it being kind of another form of advertising, another kind of expansion of the market to young men. There's long been the way the market's worked for a long time has been, towards women, is make women feel insecure, then sell them cosmetics and procedures and
Hmm.
various other things. And now it's like weight loss drugs or whatever, just all these
Right.
different things. And people have figured out that you could make more money by expanding that market to men. So there's young boys now taking like anabolic steroids. There's more boys weightlifting now, which is not necessarily a bad thing, of course. But it's
Question
like,
of why.
why are they doing it? Is it because
Right.
they want to be fit and athletic and strong or whatever, or is it because they feel like that if they don't do that, they won't be respected? They'll be they won't be kind of sufficient as men, if you like. And yeah, the whole ideology of the manosphere, you can see it's like a racket. So the ideology, an example would be the 80-20 rule is this thing promoted by the manosphere. So that's the idea that uh, the majority of women, basically, it's not just 80%. They would say all women are just pursuing 20% of men. And, there's, in a society where, in a kind of post-sexual revolution society where women can choose, where women aren't kind of shamed into getting married, women kind of have the freedom to choose, and they're only going to choose this small kind of cohort of men. So on the one
Right.
hand, there's this kind of misogynistic view behind that women can't really be trusted to choose themselves. Society needs to decide for them. There needs to be that needs to be culturally enforced. But it's also very useful as a kind of sales trick to tell men this, because then they say to men, well, you're going to be one of the surplus men unless you
Mm.
buy my course, unless you pay kind of $10,000. You're not going to be part of the 20%, and you're just going to be single your whole life. You're not going to be respected. Whereas if you pay this money and join my course, you too can join the
The
sexual
20.
elite is what they would say. And it's kind of hammering away at that. And it's not just that they believe this, it's that it's very convenient for them to believe this, or at least espouse this, because they profit from that the more popular that belief becomes, the more money they make and the more clicks and kind of cash they generate.
And I wonder if they actually believe it. I can tell you for a fact, a lot of women who are pursuable are not pursuing anyone. Not only are we not pursuing the 20, we're not pursuing anyone. But to go back to your point, I think I just always wonder, do they really believe it? Or do they just want to make sure other men are so hyper focused on feeling bad about themselves for not being able to get a 22-year-old beautiful girl to make out with them
I think
so
I
that they
think
can get money?
Yeah, I think maybe a bit of both, because a lot of the people who end up becoming kind of masculinity entrepreneurs, they themselves at one point were recruited into that world and kind of went through the different stages of those beliefs. So a lot of them do actually believe it, and then just figure that they have a way to make money from it.
Right.
A lot of them maybe don't believe it as much as they make out, and they exaggerate it. But I also think sometimes with those kind of industries, even the gurus, I think, are being radicalized themselves sometimes in the process. Say like a Substack or a podcast, they'll start by having kind of nuanced guests, and then they'll
Hmm.
have one guest who's like inflammatory, like a culture war type person, and they'll see that this kind of more polarized style of communication, it generates a lot more clicks and cash, and so they'll start leaning into that more and just doing the kind of controversial stuff. And then yeah, I mean, I know some of these people personally who've done that, and then you do meet them later on, and the mask now fits the face essentially. Like they've been radicalized by their own content, by kind of marinating themselves in that in that stuff, and
That's a
yeah, the
great
mask once they
soundbite.
fix the face, they start believing it.
That's a great soundbite. The mask now fits the face. That's
Yeah, I mean, that just
powerful.
came off the top of my head, but yeah, it's kind
Yeah.
of yeah, that's kind of how it works, really.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, what you speak becomes what you believe, becomes what you become, et cetera, but the mask now fits the face is really interesting. The reason this is getting worse is the internet generally, right? Because of how isolated we become. You know, I'm in my late 40s. When we were growing up, we had that normal progression of relationships where I had a crush on a boy who didn't know my name, you know? And then I had a crush on a boy and he smiled at me. And then one day we kissed and it was a big deal. And then he carried my books between class. And like the natural progression of things to the point where when we were in our 20s and we were out in the world in this pickup artist culture and whatever, we could laugh about it because it wasn't core to the experience. And I think if we could just get rid of the internet for about 20 years, people would go back to interacting in real life. And you just can't fake anything for long enough in real life. And then you would see that it's not 80-20, that not always the skinny girl gets the boy, that kind of thing. And all the dynamics around dating would feel less sharp around the edges because the internet makes it sharp around the edges. But the other argument is that potentially boys are just different now and girls are just different now and adolescence is different now. So you've been open about the outsider experiences that you had yourself, and you talked about personally attending a pickup education weekend in London. And it's not like you were a misogynist or anything. You went to a weekend to try to learn something. That actually makes perfect sense for me, for a guy in their 20s to just try something like that because why not, right? What do you think, if anything, is different about young men now?
Yeah, I mean, social media is the obvious kind of place to start. I mean, the thing is, yeah, I mean, I think it's true. The in terms of the biggest antidote to some of the manosphere stuff is basically like go outside and turn your
Yeah.
phone off. I mean,
It's real
but no
life,
one does
right?
that. Like, so an example would be uh, there's several examples I could use. One would be the way that the masculinity hucksters, the way that these kind of entrepreneurs sell their stuff. I mean, back when I was a kid, this stuff would be like they'd have their little advert in the back of like a men's magazine or an adult magazine or something,
Yeah.
um, selling their kind of get rich quick scheme, their magic beans or whatever. And most people would just like see it for what it was.
Mhm.
But now they have kind of video based social media. You can communicate directly to like a 13-year-old boy.
Mhm.
You have these big personalities, these men with this kind of the charisma that goes with the size of the platform that people kind of look up to because it's like, whoa, this person has like, you know, all these followers and all these kind of tributes being paid to them with clicks and likes and shares online, but also against the backdrop of like a lifestyle. So
Yeah.
back in the day, you wouldn't believe what they were saying, like, oh, they can make you rich or something. It just seemed kind of too good to be true. But now
Right.
they sit in front of, they're on Instagram sitting in front of the mansion, the infinity pool, you know,
Right.
the Lamborghini and the kind of and the most important status symbol of all, like the women in like the bikinis and
Yeah.
whatever. So
Right.
it's kind of seeing is believing, if especially if you're a young guy and social media is relatively new. Even you know, my boomer mum will see things on social media and think it's real. So that's a huge part of it. What's driving it? I mean, dating apps, the way that people
Yeah.
now meet through this kind of two-dimensional catalog of flesh where the sum of your attractiveness is just in a picture
Yeah.
and
That's
how
it.
much status you show off in the picture. I mean, loads has changed and it's conducive to, I mean, aside from all the companies, all these entrepreneurs who have a financial incentive to make you feel bad, the way the world has changed, the way that it's moved online has led to a lot of these kind of distortions in terms of how we see other people, how we see what other people want in a partner. It's
Mm.
distorted all of that. So we're kind of more disconnected, even though, you know, the internet was ostensibly, or social media was ostensibly supposed to connect us. It's sort of done the opposite, I think.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the people you met when you went down this rabbit hole, and going undercover in that universe must have been really fascinating. I mean, I imagine you're biting your tongue a lot. Or just going home and wanting to hug the women you love closer because this is some scary shit. I mean, there's one end of the spectrum where you've got men saying, work out more, get more ripped, and you'll get more women. I think that's harmless. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where they really, truly have nothing but hate for women, but they want to use them for sexual purposes and for ego. And then you see the the next jump from that pit end of the manosphere, which is, there are private chat groups, and what happened with Giselle Pellicos. I was really curious, when you were in these rooms with men who've gone deeply enough into the manosphere to attend courses, to attend these radicalized versions of men's groups, there's probably a difference between the ones that are more susceptible to being radicalized versus someone who you think was able to at least see clearly that, hey, there's a line that's being crossed here, and I actually don't hate women, and maybe this is not the course for me. And maybe those boys and men didn't speak up. Maybe they just didn't come back to the next one, right? But what do you think distinguishes a young man who will be susceptible to that kind of misogynistic radicalization from the kind of young man who you think will be able to see clearly that leading with anger isn't going to get anyone anywhere?
I mean, I can't remember meeting any men who genuinely thought they hated women. Like they all thought they didn't. That was kind of, yeah. I can't. I mean, I'm sure I've seen men online who in the manosphere who basically said they hated women. I also met men and listened to men who it was fairly obvious they did hate women, but it was very rare for them to actually admit they hated women. They
It's a
would
good distinction. Yeah. Yeah.
they even though every kind of fiber of their being basically did hate women. They wouldn't really believe that they did. They'd have all these rationalizations they'd built up over time, and sometimes it was hard to kind of make distinctions. Like why is this person kind of immune to this kind
Mm.
of world, and why is this person more susceptible to it? I mean, one thing that did come up quite a few times was men who had kind of abusive parents or domineering parents. That's could be like mothers or fathers. So there was kind of examples of boys who had like stepfathers or biological fathers who made them feel like they were never manly enough or something. So they always felt they needed to prove themselves. But also there was also kind of I did speak to boys whose mothers were kind of yeah, domineering was one example where it
Yeah.
was kind of the same thing, really. Like they made the son feel like they weren't really enough as themselves. Like it affected their self-esteem, and then so they gravitate towards these kind of doctrines which said you aren't enough, which reinforced that. They said the doctrines of the manosphere said like you aren't enough, you actually aren't enough, um, and kind of hammered down on that stuff. So to be a man, you need to follow these things, and they had this identity crisis, and the manosphere was appealing because it set out like this step-by-step guide to kind of fix your
Right.
identity. And so they'd be on this constant treadmill of going to these seminars and boot camps and
Mhm.
buying these programs, uh, basically trying to fill a hole, but it never worked really. It was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. Like at the end of
Yeah.
the day, so it's like this hasn't worked, so now I need to buy the next course. And the companies knew that as well. So the companies would say, the pickup companies or the self development masculinity companies would say, well, that course, the course you bought 2 years ago, well, we've got a new product now, which is much better. That's going to kind of fix you. And yeah, I mean that was something I saw a lot, at the same faces. Some people dipped into it and then left, and uh, yeah, they had a period of vulnerability, went into the manosphere, then they kind of fixed. It did help maybe in some ways, but then they realize, oh, this isn't for me. But then other people I just see on this treadmill where they just kind of, yeah, they're constantly searching for answers, but all that seemed to
Mhm.
happen was they just get angrier and angrier over time.
You just made a connection for me. Let's say there's a young man who goes into this universe of the manosphere because he felt not good enough. Then he buys in almost like it's a religion. And when people buy into a cult, they say, I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do and it's going to work and I'll be saved. Maybe they say work out and you start getting ripped. Maybe they say hit on 600 women and neg them. And then a pretty girl will say yes to you. And then, I mean, then they'll go out and then they'll meet that woman. But which woman do you think they're getting? They are getting the woman who is buying the equivalent course on the other side. You're finding a woman who was equivalently ripe for the you're not good enough message that makes her want to be as skinny as possible, right? So maybe she's not eating and she's dizzy and now she's at a club looking for validation. He's at a club looking for someone to neg into sleeping with him. Now they're in love. They think they're in love. And what's going to happen to the next generation of children growing up with a mom who hates herself, a dad who hates the mom, and a family where nobody really is emotionally present? So that's terrifying. We can put a pin in that because that's terrifying, and I don't want us to cry on the podcast, but we see where it's going, right? It, it, ju- it that's just that's kind of as you were speaking, that was what I was picturing is these 2 people meeting at a club, and it's just an utter disaster waiting to happen. Um, but I wanna talk a little bit about the the infamous figures you came across in your research. Can you tell me what the experience was like of meeting people up close who are really selling misogyny?
Yeah, so I mean, I met I met a guy called Rollo Tomasi, who's like he's kind of he calls himself, I think he calls himself the godfather of the red pill. So the red pill is kind of a subdivision of the manosphere. It's from the Matrix film. The red pill is the idea that in the Matrix, if you take the red pill, you see the world as it truly is. Whereas if you take the blue pill, you remain in blissful ignorance. And in the manosphere, it's the same thing according to them. You know, if you take the red pill, you see that women are actually the rulers of the world and not men, and men are oppressed, not women. Men are kind of languishing under the boot of feminism. That's kind of their view of the world. And Rollo Tomasi is kind of the main, I suppose, theorist of that world. I met him in Vegas with he was working with a guy called Michael Sartain, who's another kind of manosphere influencer. He was running this course in Las Vegas called the Men of Action program.
Mm.
Men would pay like $10,000, and I think it was 6 months like mentoring and stuff. But then they'd also be in Vegas for this kind of these photo shoots with like Lamborghinis, and it's like teaching men to be high status alpha males. Besides Vegas, the time I spent there, I spent time in Orlando, Florida, with a guy called Anthony Johnson, who used to be the quote unquote president of the Manosphere. He was organizing these meetings called the 21 Convention, like these summits. That went on for, I think, 17, 18 years. And I went to
What
that
was
in
the premise
2022.
of that? The premise of
It's
the
just kind of,
summit? Mm.
so it's kind of masculine, talking about red pill masculinity, basically. It was the last summit. The tagline was "Make Men Great Again," so it was very kind of Trump orientated. They had, in fact, MAGA style trucker caps there with
Of course.
"Make Men Great Again" on the front. Also, "Make Women Great Again," and uh, the future is patriarchy. There was something about women going back to the kitchen or something on one of them. I've got a picture somewhere, but it was kind of MAGA adjacent. And I met a guy there who was a Manosphere influencer who subsequently went to prison for storming in the Capitol building on January 6th. This was
Mm.
2022. He was kind of waiting for the trial, but then he went to jail, and I think he's out now because he got pardoned by
Oh.
Trump earlier this year. And yeah, a bunch of other people like that. Some bodybuilding, strength camp influencers, bodybuilding influencers, dating coaches,
Mm.
uh, just like lifestyle coaches and relationship coaches. It's like these older men, these older male figures who their audience was like men who'd just come out of messy divorces or something, who were kind of bitter about it. And there's this whole industry around those figures kind of latching onto that and exploiting that anger and saying that, oh, it was all your wife's fault and this is why it happened, giving them a framework to explain
Of
why their
course, because
divorces
she's the
happened. And it
worst.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And you know, it's because the women are just like out of control now because the 60s happened. And I met a bunch of people and also people advocating like civil war and political violence as well,
Yeah.
from the manosphere from within the manosphere. So a bunch of people.
And what is so strikingly sad to me about it, even when you explain all of this to me, it couldn't seem further from my world, but I know that it's all around me. I live in New York City, doesn't mean it's not all around me. So there's this level of resentment that, women have felt, frankly, since the beginning of time. But then you say that they're arguing make men great again. And I even react against that because men still are great. There are wonderful men everywhere. I'm surrounded by them. They are just this concept that's being sold to men and to women. I think that is ultimately the most toxic is the idea that men are no longer men. Men are absolutely still men. There are still wonderful men everywhere. And they're just not yelling from the rooftops about every small win they make. They're just doing the thing, having the discipline, showing up, raising their families, or asking women out on dates and doing whatever they need to do in it. And I just kind of wish there was a voice that was louder that was showing it. I feel like when we were growing up, it was on TV. You could see men who were calmly the head of their household in a peaceful way. with happy wives. Another point you made that stuck in my mind earlier was you said this is the idea that women are in fact in charge of everything. And I just wonder if somebody could get up in that environment and say, "Excuse me, pardon me, question. If women are in charge of everything, why weren't they allowed to have a credit card in their own name until like 5 minutes ago? And why are they also always being raped?" Like they're not very good at being in charge of everything on account of they make 70 cents on the dollar. Pardon me, like what? It's such common sense stuff that is being ignored, and it goes back to how people want to be radicalized. Of all the leaders in the manosphere you came across, who do you think was the most charismatic?
In terms of that I met personally,
Mhm.
Michael Sartain was quite charismatic in the Vegas influencer I met. I mean, in terms of wider manosphere, I mean, someone like Andrew Tate is charismatic. I mean, and the people who kind of rise to the top in that world, it tends to be people who have that kind of game show charisma. And the example of Trump would be the kind of game show, or Michael Sartain, even a kind of game show host charisma. Andrew Tate is like a kind of gangster charisma, like a bad boy charisma. Um, yeah, I would say and charisma is something that those people often developed with time. I met some of the pickup artist guys I met became quite charismatic because they just kind of learned figured out what it was like speaking with conviction, speaking with kind of conviction about everything. Uh, Things
It
that
seems
it
like
could be kind of
conviction and disdain. Like
yeah, and kind
conviction
of
coupled with disdain for whoever you're speaking to.
yeah, sometimes, yeah, and kind of conviction, everything. Even if you don't know what you're talking about, but still speaking with conviction, that's kind of a big part of it. And yeah, there's kind of the body language stuff like eye contact, tonality, and
Right.
frame control, as they would call it, which is basically being able to kind of assert your will over other people.
I'm sorry,
In
frame control?
Yeah, they would call that. They would talk about frame control a lot, which is the idea of in any interaction, one person is like a sub communication. Like in any interaction, one person is controlling the frame more than the other
Uh,
person. It's a recipe for like micromanaging everything, but it's basically
mhm.
the idea of social dominance and asserting your will over other people. And yeah, like Trump is a good example of someone who's quite good at that in a public setting. So uh, there's his when he's asked a difficult question, he will like turn it round on the person
Mhm.
asking the question and kind of take the frame back. Is how the manosphere would put that. Or there
So
was
evade.
what's that?
Evade the question you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
wanna
it is,
answer.
but it kind of works it works on a superficial level. It can kind of
Right.
carry the audience, even though he hasn't answered the question. So an example would be there was a famous example when he first ran for president in the US where he's asked, kind of, didn't you call like women fat or something?
Mhm.
There's a clip of it. Didn't you say that these women were fat? And the audience kind of waits for him to like, because he did say this, and then he's just like, oh no, it was just Rosie O'Donnell, and it's like the joke, and everyone just laughs. And it's even people, and it's kind of an absurd kind of spectacle, but it's kind of he's taken the frame back. He's kind of you're kind of operating on his terrain.
Right.
The report doesn't come back with anything. That's kind of a big part of it. And a lot of these guys learned how to do that when they were, from the pickup stuff or just studying kind of human psychology, and then they use it to manipulate people, but
Right.
women first, but also their clients, the men.
Well, and anyone who's ripe for manipulation, right?
The thing is, if you're in front of an audience of kind of 50,000 people and they're all kind of laughing with your kind of antagonist,
Right.
like even I've been in like smaller scale situations where you think you'll say something, but you just basically shut the social pressure kind of shuts you down a bit,
The
and it's
social
hard.
pressure, sure.
And it's even hard. Like even if you can summon the reply, it's your voice kind of quivers. You lose kind of your bearings a bit. You become uncentered, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, and someone who can absorb that much social pressure and just
Is
make a kind
rare.
of off the cuff joke like that, it is very charismatic. It's kind of
Mm.
a certain definition of charisma, I would say.
Recently I was dealing with someone who I would say has just quite naturally all of the kind of, I don't wanna say misogynistic, but bravado-based charisma that I think men are trying to learn in this pickup artist manosphere universe. And he's not a misogynist, he just happens to have that way of behaving, and he was so evasive about something I asked him. So I just stopped and I said, "Are you okay?" And then he kind of went down his rabbit hole, and then I waited a few minutes, I let him talk because people just keep talking and talking and talking, and I said, "Are you okay?" Like, really, really low volume. I don't think I've ever seen him so thrown off because I wasn't buying into it, but I wasn't giving him the challenge that is easy to fight, which is, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I'm reacting to it, and that's the reality is, "You're weird. Are you okay?" What would be your advice in everyday interactions for women who are dealing with men who are clearly trying to assert dominance over the situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's something guys have to deal with as well sometimes from
Yeah,
especially in work environments.
take them and I'll write them down. I love it.
I mean, the easiest and best one is just to like ignore the person. So a lot of those people I find would kind of they try and bombard you with questions to try and put you in like a box or try and kind of make you qualify yourself, so make you justify your existence. And there's kind of really subtle things you can do to just kind of throw that off, like either give a silly answer, either take ages to reply, just like make them repeat themselves.
I like making them repeat themselves.
You're not
Yeah.
putting yourself in the box where you're jumping through their hoops all the time. That's kind of stuff can be useful to have in the toolkit, so to speak.
I like the idea of also responding with a silly answer.
Sometimes if someone's like mean or something, oh, you're this, it's just like opinions vary. It's just like
Yeah.
neutral kind of
Opinions vary.
yeah, it's opinions vary. Well, I mean, yeah, that's kind of
Just
a
throw them
good
off.
neutral like stock. I got that from there's that film with Patrick Swayze, the not the famous one, it's the one where he's like a bodyguard, no, like a bouncer, Roadhouse.
Oh,
He
right,
kind
right,
of says
right.
it. He kind of says it in that at one point. It was just a really good line. But yeah, just I mean, best thing is just to like walk away from those people, like ignore them really.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, if we could all walk away from these situations, we'd be in better shape. But have you come across any men's groups that you think are positive, where they're really trying to counteract the toxicity that's out there?
Yeah. So there's a guy in Britain called Graham Golden who's like a ex-police officer who goes around talking about something called the bystander effect. It's the idea, or the bystander kind of yeah, the bystander effect. Yeah, that's right. Where
Yeah.
is like in a friendship group or WhatsApp group or something, like intervening, like if someone's doing something misogynistic, like calling it out or stepping in if someone's making a woman feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There's lots of kind of individuals doing stuff like that. In terms of groups, I mean, a lot of the groups tend to be the kind of hyper masculine stuff. But
Yeah.
then I say that, but then a lot of stuff below the radar, just kind of sports groups. So like I play five-a-side football twice a week, and it's like, yeah, we're not there to talk about masculinity, but it's a way to kind of get men out of the house, get men off the internet, get men kind of letting out some of that aggression or frustration in like a constructive way. I've
Yeah.
been to men's groups. When I was researching the book, I went to like a Jungian men's group in London. I'm just trying to think, it's about 12 men, maybe 10 or 12 men there, and it was over 2 days on the weekend. And it's just men, and it's about kind of talking through the different sides of your personality that you don't feel comfortable expressing. Maybe so for a lot of men, that's kind of more stereotypically feminine qualities, like
Yeah.
being like more opening up about emotions and vulnerability, things like that. That was good. I thought that was really constructive. I thought a lot of people came away from that thinking more about their behaviors, thinking more about how they relate to women, thinking about insecurities, which often are expressed in these kind of vitriolic behaviors, vitriolic language against women, or attempts to kind of dominate people to assert control, coming from a
Mhm.
place of insecurity very often. So I think that stuff tackles the insecurity more at the root, so it's not projected onto the world. I went as a journalist first of all, but it was actually like I thought I really enjoyed the 2 day process as well,
Well, I'm glad to hear that that exists because I think there are a lot of men who are looking for things like that, and
like
frankly,
a
it'll
men's
have
retreat,
a
very
butterfly
very constructive.
effect because one of those guys is gonna go home and he has a brother-in-law who would have never gone to that retreat, but he's gonna be a little bit more auditing of his own response to his brother-in-law's casually gross comment. And he's
Yeah,
gonna say, "Dude,
sure.
cut it out. Like, you're married to my sister." And that brother-in-law is gonna feel it. And then, you know what I mean? There's a beautiful butterfly effect that can happen. And I do understand with men, with the good men, there's a desire not to have everything in your face. And so maybe not everybody's gonna go to a men's retreat. Knowing that these things exist is very heartening for me as a mother of a boy who's growing up trying to figure out how to be a man in the world. Um, And for what it's worth, thank you for the work that you do.
No, thank you for reading the book and inviting me on.
We need all the voices of the normal men to get louder because I think there are good men everywhere. I see them all the time. I hang out with them all the time. I was raised by them. I am raising one of them. And I don't think it's going to be this polarized forever because we were not meant to hate each other.